"What happens if I touch you?" asked the lowly cowboy. The giant Apache woman smiled back. Gideon Nash had no idea why those words left his mouth. He was supposed to be grateful, quiet, maybe even apologetic. She had just saved his life from 3 armed men who would have left him bleeding in the dust, but standing there in that secluded canyon where his horse kept stepping nervously and even the wind seemed to hold still. Something made him speak words that should have gotten him killed, towered over him by at least a foot. This woman who moved with the grace of a predator and struck faster than a rattlesnake. Her dark hair was braided with small bones and feathers, her buckskin dress revealing arms that could probably snap his neck without effort. Her smile was the kind that dangerous women wore when they held all the power. But her eyes studied him with an intensity that made his skin burn. The most unsettling part wasn't his sudden boldness or even her reaction. It was the way she tilted her head as if measuring something about him that he couldn't see. The way her fingers traced the leather cord around her neck while she considered his question. The way she looked at him like she was solving a puzzle he didn't even know existed. "Interesting question from such a small man," she said. Her English perfect but accented. Her voice carried a hint of amusement that made his pulse quicken in ways he couldn't control. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the sage and smoke in her hair, close enough that he had to crane his neck to meet her gaze. "Maybe we find out." Hours earlier, Gideon Nash was certain he was about to die. His horse had thrown him into a rocky ravine, and 3 men with rifles were closing in, their faces twisted with the kind of cruelty that came from too much whiskey and too little conscience. "Look what we got here," the leader had sneered, spitting tobacco juice near Gideon's boots. "Lost little lamb, far from home." Gideon pressed his back against the canyon wall, his ribs screaming from the fall. He was 28 years old, barely 5'6" in tall, and built like a scarecrow against 3 armed men. He had about as much chance as a candle in a thunderstorm. That's when she appeared. One moment, the men were laughing, dividing up what little money Gideon carried. The next, their leader was on the ground, clutching his wrist and howling. The rifle that had been pointed at Gideon's chest now lay in pieces, the wooden stock shattered against the rock face. She moved like death itself, this Apache woman who seemed to have materialized from the canyon walls, nearly 6 feet tall with muscles that rippled beneath bronze skin. She fought with a savagery that left Gideon breathless, her fist connected with bone. Her knee found its mark between one man's legs, and when the third tried to run, she caught him by the collar and threw him face first into the dirt. Within minutes, all 3 men were stumbling away, bleeding and cursing, leaving behind their weapons and their wounded pride. Gideon stared up at his savior, his heart hammering against his ribs. She stood over him like some ancient goddess of war, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, not a single strand of her long black hair out of place. The morning sun created a halo around her massive frame, and for a moment, Gideon forgot how to breathe. "You hurt?" she asked, her voice deeper than most men's, but somehow feminine in a way that made his stomach flutter. He shook his head, still unable to find words. She extended a hand to help him up, and when their fingers touched, electricity shot through his entire body. Her palm was calloused from years of hard living, but her touch was surprisingly gentle. Standing next to her, Gideon felt like a child. She was everything he wasn't. Tall, powerful, confident, dangerous. She was the kind of woman who could break him in half without breaking a sweat. And somehow, that thought both terrified and excited him. "Why?" he finally managed to croak out. "Why? Help me!" Her dark eyes studied his face with an intensity that made him squirm. Then slowly, her lips curved into a smile that made his knees weak and his pulse race with something that definitely wasn't gratitude. "Maybe I like small things," she said, softly. "They break so beautifully." The words hit Gideon like a physical blow. "They break so beautifully." Coming from anyone else, it would have sounded like a threat. From her lips, in that husky voice that seemed to caress each syllable, it sounded like a promise. He swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. "I'm not that fragile," she laughed, a rich sound that echoed off the canyon walls. "No, you look like a strong wind could carry you away." She circled him slowly, like a cat studying a wounded bird. "What's a little man like you doing so far from civilization?" Gideon's cheeks burned. All his life, people had looked at him the same way, with pity, amusement, dismissal. But when she said it, when her eyes traveled down his lean frame with obvious appreciation, it felt different. It felt like hunger. "I'm a surveyor," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Mapping territories for the railroad? Railroad!" She spat the word like it tasted bitter. "White man's iron snake, cutting up the earth." The disapproval in her voice should have warned him to back down, apologize, maybe even run. Instead, Gideon found himself stepping closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. Maybe, but it pays honest wages for honest work. She stopped circling and faced him directly. This close, he could see flecks of gold in her dark eyes, could smell the leather and sage that clung to her skin. His head barely reached her chin, forcing him to tilt his neck back like he was looking up at a mountain. "Honest work," she repeated thoughtfully. "You measure land that was never yours to measure, and you attack men who were never yours to attack," he shot back, surprised by his own boldness. Her eyebrows rose, and for a terrifying moment, Gideon thought she might strike him down where he stood. Instead, her smile widened, revealing white teeth that looked sharp enough to tear flesh. "You have fire in you, little surveyor." "I didn't expect that." The way she said little made heat in his stomach. He'd spent years hating that word, but when it rolled off her tongue, it sounded almost affectionate, like an endearment between lovers. "My name is Gideon," he said quietly. "Gideon Nash." "Ayanna," she replied, and somehow made his plain English name sound exotic in return. They stood there in the growing heat of the day, two people from different worlds who should have been enemies. The silence stretched between them, thick with possibility and danger. Finally, Gideon's courage, or perhaps his stupidity, reached its breaking point. The question tumbled from his lips before he could stop it. "What happens if I touch you?" Ayanna's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in her eyes, something predatory and wild that made every nerve in his body come alive. "Interesting question," she murmured, stepping close enough that her body heat radiated against his skin. "Maybe we should find out." But before either of them could move, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the canyon. Multiple riders moving fast and with purpose. Ayanna's expression instantly hardened. "You need to leave now." Gideon's blood turned to ice at the urgency in Ayanna's voice. The approaching hoof beats grew louder, echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. But instead of running, he found himself stepping closer to her, close enough to see the genuine concern flickering. In her dark eyes, "Who are they?" he whispered. "Men who would rather see me dead than breathing," she replied, her hand moving instinctively to the knife at her belt. "And they wouldn't hesitate to hurt you for being with me." The word "with" hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Gideon's heart race. Were they together? Was that what this was becoming? "I'm not leaving you to face them alone," he said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. Ayanna's eyes widened slightly. "You barely survived 3 drunken fools, and now you want to fight real killers." "Want to protect you." The words were out before he could stop them, and immediately he felt foolish. What protection could he possibly offer this warrior goddess who had just saved his life? But something in his declaration seemed to touch her because her expression softened. "Little surveyor with big heart," she murmured, and this time the word little sounded tender rather than dismissive. The hoofbeats were close now, maybe 50 yards away. Ayana grabbed Gideon's hand and pulled him toward a narrow crevice in the canyon wall. Her palm was warm and strong against his. And even in their desperate situation, the contact sent electricity up his arm. They squeezed into the hiding spot just as 5 riders rounded the bend. Gideon pressed his back against the cold stone, acutely aware of Ayana's body heat beside him in the cramped space. Her shoulder pressed. Against his chest, her hair tickled his cheek, and he could feel her controlled breathing against his neck. The men who entered the canyon were nothing like the crude drifters from before. These rode with military precision, their weapons clean and well-maintained, their eyes scanning every shadow with professional thoroughness. Their leader, a weathered man with a cavalry mustache, dismounted and examined the ground where the earlier fight had taken place. Fresh tracks, he called to his men. The Apache woman was here, and she wasn't alone. Gideon's pulse hammered so loudly he was certain it would give them away. Ayana's hand found his in the darkness and squeezed gently, a gesture that was somehow both reassuring and intimate. "She's getting bolder," another rider said, "attacking white men in broad daylight." "Or protecting someone," the leader replied thoughtfully. His gaze swept the canyon walls, lingering dangerously close to their hiding place. "Search every crevice. She's still here. I can feel it." Ayana's grip on Gideon's hand tightened. In the dim light, he could see her jaw clench with barely controlled fury. These men weren't just hunting her. They were enjoying it. As the soldiers began their systematic search, moving closer to their hiding spot with each passing second, Ayana leaned close to Gideon's ear. Her lips barely brushed his skin as she whispered, "When I move, you run. No matter what happens to me, you run." But Gideon was done running, done being the small, weak man everyone expected him to be. The soldiers were methodical in their search, checking every shadow and crevice with practiced efficiency. Gideon could hear their boots scraping against stone. Getting closer with each heartbeat. Beside him, Ayana's muscles coiled like a spring, ready to unleash violence. "Found something, Captain?" One of the men called out. He discovered the broken rifle pieces left from the earlier fight. The captain examined the shattered wood and bent metal. "She's stronger than we thought. No ordinary woman breaks a rifle stock with her bare hands." "Maybe." "She ain't ordinary," another soldier muttered nervously. "Indians got their ways of shut your full mouth," the captain snapped. "She bleeds red same as anyone, and when we find her, she'll hang same as anyone." Ayana's breathing changed beside Gideon, becoming deeper and more controlled. He recognized it as the breathing of someone preparing for battle. Her free hand moved to her knife, and he knew that in seconds she would burst from their hiding place like a force of nature. But she would be outnumbered 5-1. These weren't drunk drifters. They were trained killers with rifles and a clear advantage. Even Ayana couldn't fight those odds and win. Without thinking, Gideon squeezed her hand and whispered directly into her ear, "Trust me." Before she could respond, he stepped out of the crevice with his hands raised. "Don't shoot," he called out, making his voice shake with fear. "I'm unarmed." The soldiers spun toward him, rifles raised. The captain's eyes narrowed as he took in Gideon's small frame and civilian clothes. "Well, well," the captain said slowly. "What do we have here? You see which way the Apache woman went, son?" Gideon nodded eagerly, playing the part of a terrified witness. "Yes, sir." "She went that way toward the northern pass, moving fast like she was running from something." "How long ago?" "Maybe 20 minutes. She was alone, sir." Looked wounded. The lie came easily to his lips, and Gideon found himself surprised by how naturally deception flowed when it mattered. The captain studied him for a long moment, then gestured to his men. "Mount up. If we push hard, we can catch her before she reaches Apache territory." As the soldiers prepared to leave, the captain turned back to Gideon. "You didn't happen to see what direction this wounded Apache was traveling from, did you?" Gideon's mouth went dry. This was a test, and the wrong answer could get them both killed. South, sir. She came from the south, bleeding from her left shoulder. The captain nodded slowly, apparently satisfied. Smart man, staying out of an Apache's way. You'd best head back to town before more of them show up. The soldiers mounted their horses and thundered away toward the northern pass, their dust cloud marking their retreat. Only, when the sound of hoofbeats had completely faded, did Ayanna emerge from the crevice. She moved toward him with predatory grace, her dark eyes unreadable. For a moment, Gideon wondered if he had miscalculated, if she was angry at his interference. Then, she was in front of him, so close he could feel her breath on his face. That was either very brave or very stupid, she said quietly. Maybe both, Gideon admitted, his heart still racing from the adrenaline. Her eyes searched his face and something shifted in her expression. When she spoke again, her voice was husky with something that might have been desire. I think I'm beginning to like you, little surveyor. Before he could respond, she pressed her palm flat against his chest, right over his hammering heart. So tell me, again, she whispered, what happens if you touch me? Ayanna's palm burned against Gideon's chest. Her fingers spread wide over his racing heart. The question hung between them like a loaded gun. What happens if you touch me this close? Gideon could see the flecks of amber in her dark eyes. Could count the small scars that marked her bronze skin like a map of battles fought and won. She was beautiful in the way that storms were beautiful, dangerous, unpredictable, capable of destroying everything in their path. I don't know, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I've never touched a woman like you. Like me. Her eyebrow arched dangerously. You mean Apache? I mean strong. The words tumbled out before he could stop them. I mean someone who could break me without effort but chooses not to. I mean someone who looks at me like I might actually matter. Something shifted in her expression, the predatory edge softening into something more complex. Her thumb traced small circles against his chest, and Gideon felt his knees grow weak. You think I would hurt you? She asked quietly. I think you could. That's what makes this terrifying. And exciting? Gideon swallowed hard. Yes. Ayanna studied his face for a long moment, then slowly began to lower her hand. But before she could pull away, Gideon caught her wrist. Her skin was warm and smooth beneath his fingers, her pulse strong and steady. Don't, he said. Don't pull away. Careful, little surveyor. You don't know what you're asking for. But Gideon was tired of being careful, tired of being the small, forgettable man who never took risks, never reached for anything beyond his grasp. With deliberate slowness, he lifted his free hand and traced the line of her jaw with his fingertips. Ayanna's breath caught. Her skin was incredibly soft, a stark contrast to the steel-hard muscles beneath. Gideon marveled at the contradiction. This woman who could kill with, her bare hands trembling at his gentle touch. Your skin is so soft, he murmured, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. You're the first man brave enough to find out, she replied, her voice husky with desire. Or stupid enough. Maybe there's no difference. Gideon's hand slid into her hair, the black strands like silk between his fingers. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for just a moment before snapping open again, as if she'd caught herself in a moment of weakness. This is dangerous, she warned him. For both of us. I know my people would kill you if they found out. I know your people would hang us both. I don't care. Ayanna's eyes widened at the fierce conviction in his voice. You should care. You should run as far from me as you can. Instead, Gideon stepped closer, eliminating the last few inches between them. What if I don't want to run anymore? Before she could answer, the distant sound of shouting echoed through the canyon, male voices calling her name but not in English. Apache voices, and they were getting closer. Ayanna's entire body went rigid. My brother, she whispered, her face going pale. He's found me. The Apache voices grew louder, accompanied by the sound of unshod horses moving through the canyon with practiced stealth. Ayanna immediately stepped away from Gideon, but not before he saw the fear flash across her features. Not fear of physical danger, but something deeper and more complex. Hide, she commanded, her voice suddenly cold and distant. If they see you with me, no. Gideon's voice was steady, surprising them both. I'm done hiding. You don't understand. My brother Takakota leads our war party. He's sworn to kill any white man who touches Apache women. Has he kept that promise before? The dark look that crossed her face was answer enough. Gideon felt his stomach turn, but he didn't back down. Then why are you here alone? Why aren't you with them? Ayanna's jaw tightened. Because I refuse to be their weapon anymore. They want me to seduce white soldiers, learn their secrets, then watch as my brother cuts their throats. The revelation hit Gideon like a physical blow. How many? Too many. Her voice was barely audible. I told them I was done. That's why they're hunting me. The pieces clicked into place in Gideon's mind. The soldiers earlier, they weren't just hunting any Apache. They were hunting you specifically. I killed their captain's brother. He was. She closed her eyes as if trying to block out a memory. He was not a good man. But his death started a war between my people and the cavalry. Blood for blood endlessly. The Apache voices were closer now, maybe 200 yards away. Gideon could make out individual words, though he didn't understand their meaning. The tone was urgent. Searching. So you're caught between two armies, he said quietly. Your own people who want to use you and the white soldiers, who want to hang you. Now you understand why touching me is dangerous, why you should run. Instead, Gideon reached for her hand. This time she didn't pull away, but her fingers were tense in his grasp. What if there was a third option? He asked. There is no third option. This is how the world works. The world is bigger than this canyon, bigger than this territory. Ayanna stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. You're talking about running away together. I'm talking about choosing our own path instead of letting others choose it for us. For a moment, hope flickered in her dark eyes. Then reality crashed back down and she shook her head. You don't know what you're asking. I've done terrible things, Gideon, things that would make you sick if you knew. I don't care about your past. You would care. You should care. The Apache voices were now close enough that Gideon could hear individual footsteps. 3 riders moving with the confidence of men on familiar ground. Ayanna looked toward the sound, then back at Gideon. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of finality that made his blood run cold. If you truly want to touch me, little surveyor, you'll have to prove you can protect me first. From them, 3 Apache warriors emerged from the canyon shadows like ghosts given flesh. The leader was unmistakably Ayanna's brother. He shared her height and predatory grace, but where she radiated controlled power, he blazed with barely contained fury. His dark eyes locked onto Gideon with the intensity of a man who had found his prey. Ayanna, Takakota called out in accented English, never taking his gaze off Gideon. Step away from the white man. No, she replied simply, moving to stand beside Gideon rather than behind him. Takakota's expression darkened further. You shame our family, our people. You consort with the enemy while our brothers die. Our brothers die because you choose war over wisdom, Ayanna shot back. I choose my own path now. There is no path for Apache women who betray their blood. Gideon felt the weight of 3, pairs of hostile eyes boring into him. These weren't the clumsy drifters from earlier or even the disciplined soldiers. These were apex predators in their natural element, and he was hopelessly outmatched. But Ayanna had challenged him to prove he could protect her, and running would prove the opposite. She's not betraying anyone, Gideon said, stepping forward despite every survival instinct screaming at him to retreat. She's choosing peace over endless killing. Takakota's hand moved to the war club at his belt. Small man speaks big words. Small words from a big heart carry more weight than big words from a small one, Gideon replied, surprised by his own steadiness. One of the other warriors snorted with amusement, earning a sharp look from Takakota. But Gideon pressed his advantage, addressing all three men. You hunt your own sister like an animal. Where I come from, men protect their women, not pursue them with weapons drawn. Where you come from, men steal land and break promises, Takakota snarled. You're right, Gideon admitted, and the unexpected agreement seemed to catch them off guard. My people have done terrible things, but I'm not my people, just like your sister doesn't have to be yours. Takakota studied him with calculating eyes. You think your pretty words will save you, surveyor? Gideon's blood chilled. They knew who he was, what he did for a living. This wasn't a chance encounter. You've been following me, he realized. Following the man who maps our sacred places for the Iron Snake, Takakota confirmed. The man who draws lines where none should exist. Ayana stepped closer to Gideon, her shoulder brushing his. The man who saved my life today by risking his own. He maps our lands, and I have killed white soldiers, Ayana said quietly. Does that make us even, or must? We both pay for our people's sins forever. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Takakota's face. Gideon sensed this was the moment that would determine everything. Not just his fate, but Ayana's future. I'll make you a deal, Gideon said, his voice carrying across the canyon with surprising authority. Single combat. If I win, you let her choose her own path. If you win, he spread his hands. You won't have to worry about me anymore. Takakota's smile was sharp as a blade. You would fight me, little surveyor. I would die for her, if necessary. The words hung in the air like a sacred oath. Takakota circled Gideon like a wolf sizing up wounded prey. The Apache warrior was everything Gideon wasn't. Tall, powerful, bred for combat. In a fair fight, Gideon would be dead within seconds. But Gideon had no intention of fighting fair. You know what your sister sees in me? Gideon asked as Takakota approached with his war club raised. The same thing you're too proud to see. And what is that, little surveyor? That sometimes the strongest choice is knowing when not to fight. With lightning speed, Gideon dropped to one knee and swept up a handful of dust and pebbles, hurling it directly into Takakota's eyes. As the warrior stumbled backward, cursing and blinking, Gideon dove for one of the broken rifle pieces from the earlier fight, but instead of using it as a weapon, he pressed the jagged metal to his own throat. Stop, he commanded, and the desperation in his voice froze everyone in place. One more step, and I open my own throat. Your sister will watch me die, and that blood will be on your hands forever. Takakota wiped his eyes clear, glaring with murderous intent. You think I care if you live or die? I think you care about her, Gideon replied, nodding toward Ayana. And she cares about me. Kill me or let me kill myself, and you'll lose your sister forever. Is your pride worth that? The canyon fell silent except for the sound of harsh breathing. Takakota's knuckles were white around his war club, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Choose, Gideon pressed, your hate for me, or your love for her. For a long, terrifying moment, Takakota seemed to weigh the options. Then slowly, he lowered his weapon. You win this time, surveyor, but if you betray her, trust. If you bring soldiers to our lands, I will find you, I understand. Takakota mounted his horse with fluid grace. Sister, he said to Ayana in Apache, his tone gentler. Now, then in English, choose wisely. The three warriors disappeared as quietly as they had arrived, leaving Gideon and Ayana alone in the gathering dusk. Gideon's hands shook as he dropped the rifle fragment, adrenaline still coursing through his veins. Ayana approached him slowly, her dark eyes luminous in the fading light. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen a man do. It was the stupidest thing I've ever done, Gideon admitted. Maybe they're the same thing? She reached out and touched his cheek, her palm warm against his skin. You asked me what would happen if... You touched me. Now I have a question for you. What? What happens when I touch you? Before he could answer, her lips found his in a kiss that tasted of freedom and possibility and the promise of tomorrow. Her arms encircled him, pulling him against her powerful frame, and for the first time in his life, Gideon felt truly safe. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ayana smiled, not the predatory grin he'd seen before, but something softer and infinitely more dangerous. So she whispered against his ear, ready to see what happens when we touch each other. Months later, a surveyor named Gideon Nash and an Apache woman called Ayana settled in a small town in California, where no one asks too many questions about the past. They built a life together based on the simple truth that love doesn't recognize borders, and sometimes the most unlikely pairs create the strongest bonds. And every night when she held him close, Gideon marveled at how perfectly they fit together, the giant and the small man who had been brave enough to ask what would happen if he touched her. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.